So for those of you who don't know, shipping is when people want two or more characters in a romantic relationship with each other. Think Ross and Rachel, or Rachel and Joey in Friends. Like, you see the writers set up multiple possibilities for who could end up with who, and fans often flock to who they think has more chemistry, or who they think would make a more compelling story, or just who they think would look cute together. A lot of times, shipping is just a creative outlet. People like to make up their own stories with stories that they know, or make fan art, and most of the time it's just really fun and harmless. But with media companies trying to cater to fandoms, I feel as though shipping and shipping arguments are starting to have a negative effect on new media being produced. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a 2005 Nickelodeon show that has recently come back into popularity due to the Netflix live action reaching older audiences. The show is about Aang the Avatar and his friends trying to stop a 100-year war and the colonialist exploits of the Fire Nation. And with its return, the shipping debates over who the main female lead in the series should be with has also returned. So let's start with the two ships that kick up the most fuss, Katara and Aang and Katara and Zuko. So I'm going to start covering it on the Katara and Aang side. Katara and Aang are the couple that actually gets together in the end of the series. A lot of people think that it's the wrong couple to have gone together and prefer Zuko and Katara together. The most common reason stating that Katara is too mature to be with someone like Aang and that Aang is more of a little brother figure to her. But in that, we run into how the text of the show is being ignored. It's a big part of the show that Katara is forced to be more mature, not because she is innately more mature as a woman, but because of the tragedy of the war that she has lived in and her mother passing away. Katara took up the role as the more mature figure as a result. In the first episode, when she's sliding down with Aang with the penguins, she says she hasn't done it in a while since she was a kid, and Aang reminds her that she is still a kid. A large part of Katara's journey is that she is reclaiming her joy and childlike wonder that was stripped her as a result of the war. And that being that the gang makes her feel like she is safe enough to explore that part of herself, being immature, being childlike, or just having less responsibilities. The anti-Katara and Aang argument doesn't really make sense to say that Aang is too childish for her when she herself is a child who deserves to have fun. And Aang and her have more romantic moments like the Cave of Amashu and the Footloose episode where she gets jealous that Aang is dancing with another girl. There are hints that they liked each other. It's not a brother and sister-like affection. And if you say so, that's just kind of like ignoring what is in the narrative itself. You can not like it, but it's there. Now, when it comes to Zutara, the main argument that people have against it is that Katara should not get with the guy whose people colonized hers and led to her mother's death. Them getting together is like John Smith and Pocahontas getting together. In order to make that statement, you have to ignore the text of the show itself again. Katara doesn't have a blanket hatred for the people of the Fire Nation and has made an effort to assist them when she thought they were in trouble on multiple occasions. Katara herself coming to befriend Zuko after the Southern Raiders episodes and acknowledging that she didn't dislike Zuko all that much, she just associated him with her mother's killer because she had never dealt with that trauma at the time. She even purposefully backed up Zuko and saved him from Azula in the last couple of episodes. The fact that she considers him a friend by the end of the series and is hanging out with him in his uncle's tea shop in the very last scene, and the fact that everybody in the gang is canonically friends with Zuko and tight with him for the rest of their lives shows that he is not a John Smith figure. Why does this only become a problem of colonizer/colonized if someone imagines them in a romantic relationship? By that metric, the whole gang should not be friends with Zuko because they're all colonizer/colonized friendships at that point. Now, if someone had that stance and stood 10 toes down on the fact that none of them should associate with Zuko, I would actually give you credit because that's an actual consistent point. But to only bring it up if there is a possibility of romantic relationship is not a consistent point to have. But in this, you're also ignoring Zuko's arc of learning that what the Fire Nation did was wrong and working to end the war and end colonialism. That's the entire last bit of the show. That's why this criticism doesn't work, because John Smith and all other colonizers did not stop their horrible actions. They continued on, being terrible and hurting people. But this is a fictional story. The colonizer learned that the conflict that he had been born into was wrong and then took active steps to stop it. Did he fumble along the way? Yes. But did the gang let him in as a bestie to the point where they all consider each other lifelong friends? Also, yes. The show itself is telling you that this guy has stopped doing what the bad thing was and then worked to fix his actions. Why are we ignoring that? And I get why people wouldn't like either ship, especially Zutara, with how prevalent the colonizer-ex-colonized ship is prevalent in media as a whole. But that's not what Zutara is. You have to be able to distance yourself from the characters in the show you're watching and take the text as is. If it personally made you uncomfortable, I understand that, but that's different than like, people who have a different interpretations of like the text, because you have to be able to take the show as it is and what it's presenting to you. To be honest, I don't really care about either ship. I just care about how people are ignoring what the show itself puts out to make it seem like the more morally superior, ship on the internet. And it really should just be like a casual hobby. It shouldn't be that serious. But for me, what makes Katara so special is that she was a character in the early 2000s who was able to contain so many multitudes and wasn't just neatly slotted into one archetype. She had a rich internal life and was given opportunities to be mature, childish, outspoken, occasionally unsure of herself, and grow as a character in that space. And to ignore elements that are key and core to her character, to make her less compelling and less of a complex character in order to fit her into a shipping mold, isn't great. Like, it sucks to me. And a lot of you are thinking, what harm does it do when fans and fandom-based ideas become popular and like the shipping mold happens? Like, what could be the damage of that? And let me tell you about the other girl in this thumbnail, Gwen Stacy. Walk with me for a moment. Walk with me. Pygmalion is the story of a sculptor who hated every woman in the area he lived in because he thought they all had bad personalities and were too promiscuous and no one was good enough for him. He makes a sculpture of a woman and comes to love it because it is beautiful and it cannot have the faults that the other women in his town have. Becoming so obsessed with it, Aphrodite sees this devotion to his object, example of love, and grants it life as the goddess of love. He marries the newly born statue woman known as Galatea. Pygmalion is rewarded for his hatred of women with what is a sinless perfect woman in his eyes. Take notes. This will be on the test later. Now back to Gwen Stacy. Gwen is a character from Spider-Man comics, and her most famous comic appearance, previous to the alternate universe version that people saw in Spider-Verse as Spider-Man or Ghost Spider, was the Death of Gwen Stacy storyline from 1973 in the Amazing Spider-Man comics. Before this, Gwen Stacy was Peter Parker's girlfriend. Gwen was a bratty girl who loved her friends but was a tense rule follower who could be a bit of a jerk and was angry at Spider-Man to the point of siding with a bigot if it meant getting Spider-Man off the streets, since she blamed Spider-Man for the death of her father. She did not know that Peter was Spider-Man when she died. The Green Goblin killed Gwen Stacy specifically because she was dating Peter and wanted to hurt him. So what happens is Gwen dies and she becomes the motivation point for Spider-Man, and it pushes Peter's character development in the 70s. And something kind of funny starts to happen. People who were fans of the Peter and Gwen pairing start to revisit it in comics and in adaptations. And it just so happens that when they do, they leave out who Gwen really was. When Gwen is mentioned in modern comics that's not the alternate universe version, Spider-Gwen, or a clone, it's as this lost Lenore figure who is without flaw. It's a woman who's never angry or disappointed with Peter. It's this perfect, sweet love interest, and in a way, that too is shipping, retrofitting a dynamic with characters who had more complicated feelings towards each other as a way of shaving down those characters. The reason I felt I had to bring up Gwen is that Peter Parker, as Spider-Man, is a character who, above all else, is loved for his flaws. When most people talk about what they love about Spider-Man, it's how relatable he is, how he isn't a perfect person, and how he has to grow from being a slightly self-centered boy into a man. Because at the core of it, Spider-Man comes from the anger and frustration Peter feels around him, and in hope of becoming more than what he is, he self-actualizes as Spider-Man, and that's what has made that character enduring for as long as it's been printed. This Spider does not exist without the flaws of the man. So to see Peter, who is beloved for his flaws and his humanity, be seen as one of the greatest fictional characters of all time, one of the most influential fictional characters of all time, while Gwen in almost every modern incarnation is a dull doll who can fulfill the role of ideal girlfriend, that you lament the loss of with somebody who has never had any negative traits, it's dehumanizing. Is Gwen not worthy of love and mourning if she is not the ideal? Why must a woman be a blandly pure Galatea to be seen as worthy of grief within these texts? And the reason I bring up Gwen in relation to Katara is, to me, Gwen Stacy is the epitome of the nightmare sculpture of acceptable woman wrought in by fandoms by making a dynamic to force a ship to work. Gwen being nothing but a way to prop up Peter and their ship, and I worry that as we get more adaptations of Avatar, we will water down Katara more and more to make fickle members of a fan base happier, as Netflix Avatar has already made Katara more gentle and less outspoken than her cartoon counterpart. There's nothing wrong with shipping or having a creative outlet. I just feel since that media companies are trying to appeal to fandoms in order to guarantee audiences, and because of the misconceptions of what the characters are and what they do get shaped differently in a fandom space than they do in an actual piece of media, things start to shift. Adaptations shape the characters around the fandom instead of trying to write something more compelling. And I just want the complexity of the characters to be remembered because it makes sense, because it makes a more interesting story than watching the watered down version of something to appease sections of a fandom and making every female character in the series reboot a Galatea, because there's something because there's already a struggle to write women in a compelling manner in a lot of fiction, especially these genre-oriented ones. When the death of Gwen Stacy was written, it was because the writers of Spider-Man at the time thought that Gwen and Peter being together made Spider-Man too happy, and then that would lead to the book being boring. And their solution for a man and a woman being together in a relationship and being mildly happy was to kill off the woman, because that was the only way they could conceive of drama for the characters, with no regard to who Gwen was as a character. And Gwen Stacy doesn't even crack my top 20 Spider-Man characters, but hearing about how flippant the writers talk about female characters, I don't want any incentive to lose what interesting girls we have left to the fandom reboot meat grinder, especially not Katara. Thanks for watching. I'm planning on doing more videos in the future. I'll try to get them out as quickly as I can. You can also let me know how you felt about the video in the comments. I think the next videos I'm gonna try and put out quickly are Spicy City and the next one about superhero girlfriends.